Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. It was a hot afternoon in southern Iraq. I remember crouching down, brushing the dust off a chunk of broken clay. It looked pretty unimpressive, honestly. Just a bunch of weird scratches, some lines, some triangles, nothing fancy. Not exactly the Mona Lisa. But as soon as I turned it over, I felt a tiny shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just clay. This was a key to understanding something that had changed humanity forever. The fragments belonged to an ancient tablet, thousands of years old. Somebody had carefully pressed marks into this wet clay with a reed stylus, then left it to bake under the unforgiving sun. And here I was millennia later, holding their grocery list, or maybe their tax return. Honestly, with ancient tablets, it's usually one or the other. But this one was different. This one was part of a ledger, a record, proof that somebody once upon a time figured out how to take something as abstract as memory and trap it in mud. See, historians still debate whether the first written words were meant for storytelling or bookkeeping, but when you look at what survives, most of it's receipts. Humanity's first great leap wasn't to write poetry. It was to make sure Bob paid for his goats. Yeah. Romance came later. As I held that broken tablet, I imagined the scribe who made it. Some sweaty, overworked accountant sitting cross-legged in a crowded marketplace, balancing debts, jotting down numbers, cursing under their breath because the reed tip kept splitting. I bet they never imagined someone like me would be turning it over thousands of years later, whispering, "Dude, this is incredible." The truth is, writing didn't begin with epic sagas or dramatic speeches. Nope. It started with problems. Very, very boring problems. See, back then, the world was changing fast. People were settling down, building cities, farming, and most importantly, trading. Suddenly, everybody owed somebody something. A sack of grain, 5 goats, 10 jars of beer. And guess what? Humans are terrible at remembering stuff. Imagine this. You lend your neighbor 3 cows. You shake hands. No problem. But 2 seasons later, oh, now suddenly it was just 1 cow. And bro, I swear you said you didn't need them back. Yeah, I've been there. And apparently so were they. Without writing, arguments over livestock could last generations. Verbal agreements were about as reliable as, well, let's just say about as reliable as that one uncle who always forgets your birthday. You know the one. And so, from these annoyances, from this chaos, from the deep primal human need to say, hey, I think you owe me, writing was born. It's kind of poetic, in a weird way. The thing that now holds our deepest poetry, our greatest ideas, our love letters, and declarations. It all started because somebody wanted to make sure their neighbor couldn't skip out on paying for a bushel of barley. As I turned the clay tablet over one more time, running my thumb along those wedge-shaped marks, it hit me. This wasn't just a relic. It was a conversation. A message from someone long gone across millennia, saying, this mattered. This was real. Don't forget. And guess what? We didn't. I kept staring at that broken tablet in my hand, and a funny thought crept in. You know, life before writing must have been absolutely chaotic. Like, imagine your entire society running on the honor system. No receipts, no contracts, no per my last email. It's a miracle humanity didn't completely collapse. Back then, the entire world operated on word of mouth. If you wanted to pass information along, you had to say it out loud. And if someone forgot, oops, too bad. Family legends, epic battles, debts, crop schedules, all floating around inside people's heads, which, let's be honest, is not the most reliable storage system. My brain can't even remember where I put my car keys yesterday, let alone my family history, going back 5 generations. The elders were basically the human version of hard drives, living, breathing databases. You had to sit with Grandpa under the tree while he recited the entire list of who married who owed who, and exactly how many goats the Johnson family still hadn't repaid since the Great Flood or whenever. But here's the kicker. Every time someone told the story, it changed. Not because they were lying necessarily, but because humans do what humans do. We forget. We embellish. We swap details around because it sounds better. And suddenly, what started as an agreement to trade 5 sheep becomes a legendary tale of how your great-uncle bravely fought off wolves to protect the village's sacred flock. Yeah, try taking that to court. And courts did exist, by the way. Even without writing, ancient people had rules, laws, systems, but enforcing them, oh boy, let's just say it depended a lot on who had the loudest voice or the biggest friends. Historians still debate whether early oral societies were more fair or more chaotic. Some argue the personal nature of word-of-mouth justice kept things more honest. Others think it was a nightmare of broken promises and selective memories. Honestly, it was probably both. Picture a village elder sitting in judgment while 2 farmers shouted each other over whose donkey wandered into whose barley field. The elder scratches his beard, sighs deeply, and then delivers a verdict based entirely on who seems less annoying that day. Oh, and by the way, he adds, if you guys keep fighting the rain, gods are gonna be mad. Totally airtight legal system, right? But don't get me wrong. Oral tradition wasn't just a mess of disputes. It was also how cultures preserved their identity. Songs, rituals, epic stories passed from one mouth to another like a living river of memory. Some of the most powerful pieces of human creativity came from these oral traditions. But you can probably guess the downside. If the storyteller got sick, if they died unexpectedly, if they forgot a part, poof, generations of knowledge just gone. I mean, it's kind of like when someone forgets to save their Word document before their laptop crashes. Except instead of losing an essay, you lose the entire history of your people. And you know what's even crazier? Without writing, even simple things like math were a nightmare. Let's say you're a grain merchant. You loan out sacks of wheat to 3 farmers. One owes you 7 sacks, one owes you 5, and the last owes you... Wait, was it 9? Or was it 6? Close enough. Spoiler alert, it was never close enough. Arguments broke out constantly. I swear you said 5 goats. No, I said 3. Well, I distinctly remember you saying 7. Welcome to the world's first customer service complaints. This was the reality for tens of thousands of years, until one day, some brilliant, possibly very tired person looked around at the endless arguments and thought, there has got to be a better way. And that, my friends, is where the magic started. So picture this somewhere around 8,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent, a stressed-out merchant sits in a dusty little hut, staring at a pile of IOUs that only exist in his head. His neighbor borrowed 5 sacks of barley, or maybe it was 6, or 8, ugh, who knows anymore. And then light bulb moment. Instead of trusting his flaky memory, he picks up a lump of soft clay and rolls it between his hands. He reaches for some pebbles. No, wait, not pebbles. Little clay balls, perfectly round, each one representing something specific. One ball for a sheep, another for a jar of oil, 3 for sacks of grain. Brilliant, right? Except here's the problem. How do you make sure nobody cheats and swaps the balls around? Easy. You shove them inside a bigger clay ball, like a piggy bank. Then you seal it shut. Boom! Now nobody can tamper with it. This, my friends, was the first receipt in human history. A clay envelope full of clay tokens. But oh no, there's a catch, a big one. Imagine you're doing business with someone, and they hand you a clay ball and say, "Trust me, there's 10 sheep tokens in there. You can't see them. You can't count them. You just have to believe the person's not a lying weasel." Yeah, that didn't go over well. So someone somewhere came up with a genius upgrade. Before sealing the clay envelope shut, they pressed the tokens onto the outside of it, making little impressions that showed exactly what was inside. Congratulations, humanity. You've just invented symbolic communication. It's hilarious to think about it, really. The entire concept of writing was born because people didn't trust each other. Honestly, not much has changed. Historians still debate whether this was truly the beginning of writing or just proto-writing, a kind of halfway point between memory and written language. But either way, it was the first time ideas were permanently captured in a physical object. And let me tell you, these clay envelopes called bulli were weird. Some were the size of tennis balls, others as small as marbles. I imagine ancient accountants had entire shelves lined with them, each one rattling faintly if you shook it. Honestly, it probably sounded like the world's most boring maraca collection. But here's where it gets wild. Over time, merchants realized something important. Why bother making the tokens at all? Why not just press the symbols for the tokens directly into the clay? Boom! Just like that, the tokens disappeared. And in their place, symbols, marks, writing. The first symbols were simple. A triangle might mean grain. A circle with a line could mean jar of oil. And combinations of these symbols told entire stories. Well, okay, not stories yet. More like Bob owes Jim 3 sheep. Pay up, but still. A written record. And so, in the dusty cities of ancient Sumer, in places with wonderfully dramatic names like Uruk and Eridu, writing began to crawl out of the mud. Here's a fun side note. Some of these early scribes were probably the world's first bureaucrats. So, if you've ever waited in line at the DMV, wondering who invented paperwork, well, you're looking at them. Oh, and fun fact, those clay envelopes, archaeologists still find them today. Some are broken open, the tokens missing. Others are perfectly intact, rattling quietly like little time capsules from a world where memory wasn't good enough anymore. There's something oddly moving about that. Some ancient merchant long dead carefully rolled these little balls of clay, sealed them with care, maybe even stamped his own personal mark onto it, a literal signature in the form of a thumbprint. And now, thousands of years later, I'm sitting here telling you about it while holding my coffee, like it's some kind of sacred relic. It's a reminder, really. The first written words weren't grand declarations or epic poems. They were quite literally, "Dude, you owe me grain." And honestly, I respect that. There's something oddly satisfying about watching how one small problem snowballs into something world-changing. Those humble clay tokens, yeah, they didn't stay humble for long. Soon, the good people of ancient Mesopotamia realized, hey, scribbling pictures of sheep on clay is way easier than stuffing tiny clay sheep into a clay ball. Efficiency, my friends. Even 5,000 years ago, people wanted to clock out early, and that's how cuneiform was born. If you've never seen cuneiform, picture this, a soggy rectangle of clay covered in rows of tiny, wedge-shaped marks. Sort of like what happens if you let your toddler poke a Play-Doh slab with a chopstick for an hour. But make no mistake, this was the first full writing system on Earth. The word cuneiform comes from the Latin for wedge-shaped, because instead of drawing curves or circles, scribes pressed a reed stylus into the soft clay at different angles. The result: a weirdly elegant collection of triangles, lines, and arrowheads that somehow turned into words. At first, it was simple. One symbol meant one thing: grain, cow, beer. Yes, beer shows up on tablets a lot. priorities. But pretty soon, people realized that drawing a million different pictures for a million different things was frankly exhausting. So they leveled up. Symbols started pulling double duty. For example, the symbol for mouth could also mean to speak. Clever, right? And before long, symbols weren't just standing for objects. They stood for sounds. This was the moment when writing became truly flexible. You could write anything: names, ideas, feelings. Okay, mostly tax records and beer rations. But still, the potential was there. Historians still debate whether this leap to sound-based symbols was intentional genius or a happy accident of linguistic laziness. Honestly, it's probably both. Now, imagine the scene. You've got some poor scribe sitting cross-legged in a dim room, clay tablet balanced on their knees, stylus in hand, squinting because the light's terrible, scribbling line after line of these tiny wedges, trying desperately not to mess up because there's no backspace button. You mess it up. Guess what? Smash the clay and start over. And you thought your job was stressful. Oh, and fun fact for you cuneiform scribes had to memorize hundreds of symbols. No joke. A fully trained scribe knew at least 600 signs, maybe more. Makes learning cursive in 3rd grade look like a walk in the park. But here's what blows my mind. Despite how weird it looks to us, cuneiform wasn't just functional, it was beautiful. Some tablets were pure art. Curved lines perfectly aligned. Wedges carefully pressed by hands that were steady, practiced, and maybe a little caffeine deprived. Okay, fine. Probably not caffeine. But definitely barley beer. And they didn't stop at clay. Oh no. They carved cuneiform into stone. They pressed it into bricks. They even engraved it onto metal. Because when humans invent something, the next logical step is to make it extra. But here's the wildest part. Cuneiform didn't stay in Mesopotamia. Like gossip at an office party, it spread. Neighboring civilizations adopted it, tweaked it, borrowed it, used it to write everything from trade deals to epic poetry to star charts. One of the most famous examples, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Yeah, humanity's first surviving epic story was written in cuneiform, on clay tablets, about a king who was part man, part god, and completely bad at making friends. And to think, it all started because somebody was tired of arguing over how many goats were owed. As I picture those scribes bent over their clay, turning sounds into symbols and symbols into meaning, I can't help but smile. They had no idea they were inventing the backbone of civilization. No idea that thousands of years later, someone like me would be here whispering their story into a microphone while someone like you listens in your car, or your living room, or while folding laundry. And it all started with wedges. Tiny little wedges in clay. Let me tell you something. If you think influencers are a modern invention, oh boy, do I have news for you. Because back in the dawn of writing, the original, influencers weren't flexing on Instagram. Nope. They were sitting cross-legged with a reed stylus in hand, absolutely dripping in ink stains, or, well, clay smudges, scribes. The original blue check marks of the ancient world. You might think being a scribe sounds boring. You'd be wrong. These folks were elite. Trained from childhood, spending years memorizing hundreds of cuneiform symbols, practicing until their wrists probably wanted to file for workers' comp if that had existed. Which, spoiler, it didn't. Being a scribe meant power. It meant status. You were the person who could read the king's proclamations, draft contracts, write prayers, and let's be honest, probably sneak in a little gossip if you felt like it. There's even an ancient Sumerian proverb that says, "A scribe who does not know Sumerian." What kind of scribe is that? Basically the ancient version of Bro, do you even code? Historians still debate whether scribes were more like civil servants or creative artists. Either way, they were irreplaceable. You wanted a marriage contract scribe. You wanted a loan document scribe. You wanted to sue your neighbor because his donkey trampled your onions. Oh yeah, scribe. And trust me, these scribes knew they were important. They had swagger. You can actually find clay tablets where scribes bragged about themselves. Stuff like, I am the scribe who writes faster than all others. Or, my hands are steady, my lines are straight, my symbols flawless. I mean, it's basically the ancient equivalent of a LinkedIn bio, except baked in clay forever. But it wasn't all paperwork and flexing. Scribes were also the guardians of culture. They copied religious texts, cataloged star charts, wrote stories, fables, jokes, even the world's first recorded customer complaint. Yes, you heard that right. One ancient tablet from 1750 BCE is literally a complaint letter from a customer who was angry about receiving bad copper. Imagine being so mad, you write a formal complaint in clay, and it survives for 4,000 years. That's next-level pettiness, and I deeply respect it. Here's an odd little fact for you scribe schools existed. Little classrooms full of students sitting on the floor with lumps of clay in front of them, being barked at by cranky teachers. Their homework copying lists, long lists, lists of trees, lists of cities, lists of fish. And if they messed up, smash the clay. Start over. Honestly, as someone who once forgot his math homework in the 8th grade, I think I would have cried. And let's not forget, scribes were the only ones who could navigate the terrifying world of taxes. Picture some farmer hauling in a cart of wheat, praying he brought the right amount, because the scribe sitting behind the tax counter has zero chill and all the authority. Scribes didn't just record, they shaped reality. If it wasn't written down, it didn't happen. If your name wasn't on the list, you didn't own the land. If your debt wasn't canceled in writing too bad, guess you still owe those 20 sheep. Imagine the drama, the power, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that everyone needed you, but very few understood what you were actually doing. Oh, and don't think they were confined to Mesopotamia. As writing spread, the role of scribes popped up in every civilization. They became the middlemen between rulers and the ruled, the translators of royal will into hard, tangible law. And every time I picture one, I imagine a tired, slightly smug person sitting there as some nervous farmer shuffles in muttering, "How do you spell goat again?" So, while Mesopotamian scribes were busy poking triangles into mud, something entirely different, and let's be honest, way flashier, was happening over in Egypt. Egypt wasn't about that wedge-shaped life. Nope. Egyptians looked at clay tablets and said, "Cute, but what if we made it fabulous?" Enter hieroglyphs. Now, if you've ever seen hieroglyphs, you know exactly what I mean. Birds, eyes, hands, lions, squiggly lines, some dude sitting on a chair. It's like someone turned an emoji keyboard into a full-blown writing system. Beautiful, colorful, and utterly extra. The Egyptians weren't just scribbling notes. They were crafting art, carving messages into temple walls, painting them inside tombs, chiseling them onto statues. Messages to the gods, to the pharaohs, to, well, anyone who might be wandering by in the afterlife. But make no mistake, this wasn't just decoration. Hieroglyphs were serious business. They could represent sounds, entire words, or even full concepts, depending on how they were arranged. Honestly, it's kind of like if every letter in English also secretly doubled as a full word, a sound effect, and a weird dad joke depending on where you stuck it. Historians still debate whether hieroglyphs were originally designed for sacred rituals, or if they were just the fanciest way to label stuff. Either way, the Egyptians weren't playing around, and the people who mastered this magical complex system, you guessed it, the scribes in Egypt were once again elite. These weren't just nerdy accountants in dusty back rooms. Oh no. These were well-paid, well-respected members of society. Their job was to make sure the words of the pharaoh and of the gods themselves were literally set in stone. And while Mesopotamian scribes were dealing with damp clay, Egyptian scribes got a serious upgrade papyrus. Papyrus was the iPad of the ancient world. Thin sheets made from reed stalks perfect for writing with ink and a reed brush. Portable, lightweight, and bonus no risk of dropping it and shattering your entire tax return. Unless you know it caught fire. But hey, pros and cons. Here's a weird little fact for you. Some scribes were even buried with their writing kits. Imagine being so committed to your job that you're like, yeah, better take my pen and notebook into the afterlife. You never know when the gods might ask for a quarterly report. And the hieroglyphs themselves, absolutely stunning. Walking into an Egyptian temple was like walking into the world's most intimidating PowerPoint presentation. Giant columns covered in symbols, walls bursting with stories about gods, battles, laws offerings, messages meant to last forever. But for everyday use, hieroglyphs were a lot. Writing your grocery list in hieroglyphs would probably take longer than actually going shopping. So the Egyptians developed shortcuts. A cursive script called hieratic for day-to-day business, faster, simpler, and much less likely to give your wrist carpal tunnel. And eventually, an even speedier form called demotic came along for scribes who just didn't have time for all those little bird drawings. But whether it was chiseled into stone or scribbled onto papyrus, the written word in Egypt carried weight. It was magic, literally. The Egyptians believed words had power, not just symbolic, but actual supernatural power. If something was written, it became real. Imagine that. A culture where writing a prayer was considered the same as saying it to the gods, where carving someone's name onto a tomb guaranteed their soul would live forever. Or plot twist, if you erased their name, poof, erased from eternity. Yeah, writing wasn't just communication in Egypt, it was immortality. I picture the scribes of Egypt hunched over their desks, sunlight glinting off the Nile, outside, carefully dragging their reed pens through fresh ink. Swirls, lines, eyes, birds, every stroke deliberate, every word meant to echo across centuries. And somehow it did. While Mesopotamia was poking clay and Egypt was painting birds on papyrus, something quietly magical was brewing far to the east in ancient China. And let me tell you, the Chinese did not come to play. Their version of writing didn't start with counting sheep or grumbling over taxes. Nope. It started with something way more dramatic: divination. That's right. The very first Chinese writing was literally people asking questions to the spirit world. I'm not even joking. Picture this. It's the Shang dynasty about 3,200 years ago. A king stands before a fire, holding the shoulder blade of an ox or sometimes a turtle shell. This wasn't barbecue prep, by the way. It was a full-blown supernatural consultation. The king would pose a question. Something like, will the harvest be good? Or will the queen's baby be a boy? Or even, are the ancestors mad because someone skipped the ritual last Tuesday? Then scribes. Yes, our old friends. The scribes would carve that question right onto the bone. Sharp tools, careful hands, no pressure, right? And then, fire. They'd heat the back of the bone until it cracked. The pattern of the cracks was interpreted as the answer from the spirit world. And just in case future generations wanted the receipts, the scribes would write the outcome right next to the original question. Historians still debate whether the writing was originally created purely for divination, or if people were already using symbols for other things, and this just happened to survive better. Either way, the oracle bones are the oldest direct ancestors of Chinese characters today, and let me tell you, they are gorgeous. Tiny, precise carvings, early versions of symbols that are still recognizable in modern Chinese. Talk about durability. I mean, the English alphabet falls apart if you try to spell night, but Chinese characters rock solid for over 3,000 years. Here's a weird little side note for you. Some of the questions found on oracle bones are hilariously mundane. One bone literally asks, "Will it rain tomorrow?" Another asks about toothaches. Imagine bothering the gods because someone has a cavity. But there were heavier questions too. Battles, crops, disease, sacrifices. The big stuff. Writing in this context wasn't just practical, it was cosmic. The very act of carving a question into bone was like dialing into the universe's customer service line, except with way fewer hold times and significantly more fire. The scribes of ancient China weren't just record keepers. They were intermediaries between the mortal world and the divine. Their job wasn't just to write, but to capture the whisper of fate itself. And guess what? The system worked. Over time, these carved symbols evolved. From cracks on bones to brush strokes on bamboo, then silk, and eventually paper. But the DNA of the writing remained. You can look at an oracle bone from 1200 BCE and still spot elements in modern Chinese characters. That's like if you opened a medieval Latin manuscript and it casually had emojis in it. And it wasn't just for kings anymore. As writing spread, it became the backbone of government trade history and culture. Laws were written. Poems were inked. Genealogies were preserved. Oh, and bureaucracy. Absolutely thriving. I mean, if there's one universal truth in the history of writing, it's that as soon as humans figure out how to write something down, they immediately use it to collect taxes. I picture a scribe sitting cross-legged, a bamboo slip balanced in one hand, a brush in the other, murmuring softly as they copy character after character, ink staining their fingertips, a pot of tea slowly going cold beside them. Outside, wind rustles through the courtyard trees, while somewhere inside, a king waits for the god's answer. And somehow, all of that, every hope, every fear, every mundane little question is still with us, etched into bone, preserved in history. By now, writing wasn't just a tool for counting goats or consulting spirits. It had become the engine of power, money, and control. And as human societies grew more complex, so did their writing systems and their reasons for writing. Think about it. What's the point of a record if nobody ever reads it? What's the point of writing laws if you can't enforce them? What's the point of contracts if there's no authority to make people stick to them? Writing exploded from simple bookkeeping into the backbone of civilization. Suddenly, it was everywhere. In the hands of merchants, priests, kings, and tax collectors. Here's an odd fact. Some of the earliest propaganda was actually written on clay tablets. Kings bragged about their victories. Priests dictated rituals. Governments posted laws in public spaces to remind everyone who was boss. Sounds like politics hasn't changed much, huh? The rise of writing meant the rise of bureaucracy. Paperwork exploded. Well, clay work, actually. Taxes were calculated, debts recorded, land ownership documented, treaties negotiated. Writing became the lifeblood of administration. And it wasn't all serious stuff. People also wrote love letters, shopping lists, and even jokes. Yes, jokes. A couple of millennia ago, someone scribbled a tablet with a joke about a dog chasing its tail. Humor survives even in wedge-shaped script. Historians still debate the speed at which writing spread from these practical uses into literature, philosophy, and science. Some argue it took centuries. Others say it happened almost overnight, once scribes realized writing's true potential. One thing's clear: writing shifted society from memory and oral tradition to permanence and record. That shift created power structures that shaped the world. For example, taxes could only be collected efficiently if someone kept track. Land disputes could only be settled if deeds were written. Kings ruled more effectively if their decrees were immortalized on stone. Imagine the stress on ancient scribes balancing between the gods, kings, merchants, and the public, literally holding the fate of empires in their ink-stained hands. And here's a juicy tidbit. Some tablets show evidence of erasures and corrections, kind of like ancient track changes. Because even 5,000 years ago, people knew that sometimes you write something dumb and have to fix it before the boss sees. Writing also birthed diplomacy. Treaties between cities and kingdoms were inscribed to avoid messy misunderstandings, because spoiler people arguing over "I said three goats" is an age-old issue. All these uses created new opportunities and new social classes. Bureaucrats, lawyers, scholars, all the jobs that revolve around words were born, and those who mastered writing controlled knowledge and therefore power. It's kind of funny to think about how something as simple as pressing symbols into clay led to entire legal systems, economies, and even philosophical schools. And yet, despite all this power and prestige, writing always kept one foot firmly planted in the mundane. Because, at its core, writing started with a simple problem: who owes what? And as long as people owe things, someone will need to write it down. If you've ever spent a miserable afternoon trying to memorize vocabulary in another language, you'll appreciate this next leap. See, writing was great and all. But there was one tiny little issue. Most early systems were insanely complicated. Cuneiform had hundreds of symbols. Hieroglyphs, same deal. Chinese characters, beautiful. But let's just say nobody was casually mastering those overnight. Enter the alphabet. Let me set the scene. Around 1800 BCE, somewhere along the eastern Mediterranean coast, probably a Phoenician merchant was sitting in his boat staring at a clay tablet covered in hundreds of complex symbols, thinking, there's got to be an easier way. And boom, the alphabet was born. Okay, maybe it didn't happen exactly like that, but close enough. The Phoenicians' expert traders and sailors needed something simpler. So instead of creating hundreds of different symbols, they narrowed it down to about 24 each, representing a specific sound. Honestly, it was kind of genius. Historians still debate whether the alphabet was created intentionally to simplify writing or accidentally through the gradual merging of older systems. Either way, the result was revolutionary. Suddenly, anyone could learn to read and write with far less effort. Well, almost anyone. School still sucked, but at least the homework was shorter. And here's the thing. This new alphabet was portable. You didn't need scribes spending decades learning symbols anymore. Merchants, soldiers, regular people all could master it fairly quickly. Imagine going from memorizing thousands of symbols to just 20-something. That's like going from reading War and Peace to reading tweets. Pretty soon, the Greeks adopted this Phoenician innovation. But being Greeks, they had to put their own spin on it. They added vowels. Yep, before the Greeks, alphabets mostly just had consonants. Imagine texting without vowels. Nightmare, right, hell friends? HWRY. Exactly. With vowels added, literacy exploded. Poetry, philosophy, drama, science, Greek culture blossomed. Because now, ideas weren't just spoken. They were preserved forever. Scrolls replaced tablets, spreading knowledge farther and faster. And guess who grabbed the baton next? Yup, The Romans. The Romans took the Greek alphabet and streamlined it further. Fewer symbols, clearer letters, easier pronunciation. Basically the ancient equivalent of updating your phone's software. And spoiler, this Roman alphabet became the basis for virtually every Western writing system we use today. Yes, even the font you chose for your TikTok captions can trace its roots back to Roman letters. Here's an odd fact. The first alphabets didn't actually have lowercase letters. Everything was written in all caps. So basically, everyone was shouting all the time. Honestly, ancient Roman texts probably looked like your grandparents' Facebook comments. Lowercase letters only emerged in the Middle Ages, mostly because monks got tired of yelling. Just kidding. Kind of. The alphabet was simple, elegant, and adaptable. Suddenly, writing wasn't just a tool of scribes and priests. It was for everyone. Farmers wrote crop records. Soldiers sent letters home. Poets composed verses. Lovers scribbled notes. And yes, bureaucrats still collected taxes. Some things never change. What started as a merchant's need to simplify his paperwork ended up democratizing knowledge. Alphabets meant ideas spread faster and farther, crossing borders and cultures with ease. Think about that next time you complain about autocorrect. Those little letters on your keyboard are the descendants of one of humanity's greatest inventions. An invention that began simply because someone looked at complicated symbols and said, "Nah, there's got to be an easier way." And there was. You know, it's funny. After thousands of years, countless clay tablets, scrolls, and alphabets, later, we're still doing essentially the same thing. Sure, we've upgraded from clay and papyrus to keyboards and screens, but the essence of writing hasn't really changed. It's still humans trying to reach out, say something, and hope someone else hears it. From ancient scribes hunched over damp clay, to you and me, scrolling through our phones, writing's journey is both incredible and strangely familiar. Every text you send, every post you make, every silly meme, it all connects back to those early humans, scratching symbols into clay. Today, writing is literally everywhere. On screens, billboards, coffee cups, tattoos. Yes, tattoos writing we willingly inject into our bodies. If that's not commitment to the written word, I don't know what is. But here's the oddest thing about writing today. Despite all our tech, it's still imperfect. Autocorrect sabotages our love messages. Emails still get misunderstood. Typos can make you famous for all the wrong reasons. Historians still debate whether writing's evolution from clay tablets to digital screens made communication clearer or just more chaotic. Honestly, it's probably both. Yet writing remains our most powerful magic. It can inspire revolutions or make someone laugh so hard they choke on their coffee. It preserves history, spreads knowledge, and yes, lets us argue with strangers online about pineapple on pizza, which is delicious, by the way. Fight me. Think of the sheer volume of written words today. Millions of texts, billions of tweets, trillions of emails, and yet each one carries a tiny echo of that first clay tablet. The desire to say, "Hey, this matters. Don't forget." And what's truly amazing is that despite this avalanche of writing, each message still feels personal. A handwritten note still warms your heart. A funny meme still brightens your day. A simple text saying, "You okay?" can make all the difference. Because writing at its core is connection. It's a way to reach across space and time and say, "I was here. I felt this. I thought this. I lived this." So when you text your friend late at night, just know that you're continuing a tradition thousands of years old. When you leave a comment online or write a grocery list, You're tapping into something primal, something that started because humans needed to remember who owed them goats. And isn't it wild to think that all this complexity, languages, alphabets, literature, emojis, began with the simple human need to keep track of stuff? We often forget just how incredible this all is, that we can press buttons on a tiny screen and instantly communicate with someone on the other side of the world, that we can record our thoughts and feelings, preserving them forever, just like those ancient scribes did, one wedge-shaped mark at a time. So, next time you're annoyed by typos or frustrated with autocorrect, take a breath. Remember that you're holding a miracle in your hands, a miracle thousands of years in the making. And as you drift off tonight, maybe picture those ancient scribes, tired but proud, looking at their clay tablets by flickering candlelight, knowing they captured something that would outlive them all. Writing is humanity's oldest magic. And guess what? It still works. Word count 156. Now, before we close our eyes, let's slow down for just a moment. Writing, as we've seen, has always been about connection. From clay tokens in ancient marketplaces to glowing screens in the palms of our hands, each word, each letter, each message has carried human hopes and dreams across time. It's easy to get lost in the noise, in the constant buzz of notifications and endless scrolling. But at its heart, writing remains a gentle whisper, an invitation to understand, to share, and to remember. Imagine those first scribes again, their steady hands carving symbols into clay by candlelight, not knowing their work would echo down through millennia. Imagine their quiet satisfaction, their small smiles as they placed tablets carefully aside, hoping their words would reach someone someday. We are that someone. Their whispers became our stories, our laughter, our memories. And maybe thousands of years from now, someone else will find our words and smile softly, wondering at the magic of it all. So let's rest now, knowing our words are safe, gently woven into humanity's endless story. Thank you for listening to the story.